Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
It is again a privilege to be a part of your center. So I would rather kind of pick up from the point that the two siblings, that is India and Myanmar, who became independent nearly during the same time and went through a kind of an hot and cold relationship between them, in the sense that since 1948 to 62 you would see a fairly good relation, in the sense that although Indians who were staying in Myanmar, they were not very comfortable, or rather they were being deprived of many of the benefits, civil they were not given jobs, there were a lot of kind of discrimination made, but still we would see that there was a fairly good relation between India and Myanmar, and India looked up to, or rather Myanmar also looked up to India for support. And it was only during the 1962 that again there is a period from 1962 to 88 onwards when you are seeing a very cold relation that is happening because of a military coup, military rule. And thereafter again we are seeing that there was a kind of a hot and cold during this time. Interestingly, it is China which was becoming very very important for Myanmar, and thereafter India again is kind of relooking her position. And subsequently in 2021, when there was another coup, you are actually seeing, or we are seeing, a different India, not the same India we would see or we had seen since 1962 to 1988. We are seeing a different India with a different approach, who is addressing, or who is kind of looking into the whole question of India Myanmar relationship. Now, when we look at the whole situation, we find that there are certain important factors that we need to understand when we are addressing the question of India Myanmar's foreign policy, or the kind of foreign relationship that we have had. Now, the main factors, I would come straight away to the main factors that have been very, very dominant since 2014, when we went for the Lookist policy was made into an Actist policy, and Myanmar being the gateway to Southeast Asia, and India uh, sharing a big boundary, a huge boundary around 1,643 kilometers boundary with four states, mainly Arunachal Pradesh, then Mizoram, Manipur, and Nagaland in the northeast of India. Myanmar definitely becomes very, very important for India to be a partner, and also to look into that if it is a safe Myanmar, a good relationship with Myanmar means a good relationship and also a lot of benefits for India as well. Now, when we look at the, again, I would try to go back to history and see that during the 1962 to 1988, and this was a time when India also had this Indo-China war, and India was not in a very happy position, and Myanmar junta, which was the military ruler, they were much aligned with China, and they felt that China was a better partner. And in fact, when we look at China, culturally and also ethnically, a lot of similarities are there. And so China was a better friend than uh, India. Now, one of the other reason was that India's commitment to democratic values and India's commitment to democracy, and India was also the Indian premier, prime minister, first prime minister was a personal friend of the Myanmar, the father of modern Myanmar, if you would say, because he was the one who had brought all the ethnic groups. Now, interestingly, Myanmar also has the same issues that plagues are, or that confronts our northeast, or had confronted for a long time, and that is the ethnic divisions that we find, and the conflicts, inter ethnic communities, they have conflicts between them, and similar kind of a thing that we would also see in Myanmar. Now, Myanmar is comprised of the first, the ethnic majority, which is called the Bamars. They are the ethnic majority, and there are multiple minority communities, and Indians are also one such, because Indians, when during the colonial period, Indians had migrated, and there was also a lot of cultural and economic exchange happening, and a lot of Indians were working. They are farmers, they are working in MNCs and in other jobs. Now, what we would see is during that period, China had become very, very important for Myanmar, and subsequently, China gradually became one of the most important players in the Asian subcontinent, as well as today, if you look at the global world. Now, the second thing that is very important to look into is not just this issue or question of Myanmar being our neighbor and we want our neighbors close to us. But another thing which is important is if you look at the global order, we see that it's a multipolar. Now, although it is a multipolar order, but it is also some at some would many are observing that it is gradually going towards a kind of a oligarchy or a oligopolar polar order where a few are actually trying to become very very important. And in the region that is the present, that is the Indian Ocean region and the Pacific region, you would see especially the Indian Ocean region, China is continuously or gradually trying to obtain more and more supremacy in the region, and there is a contest. The earlier hegemony of US is being countered by China, and India is also kind of coming up. So amidst this scenario, it becomes very important to look into the kind of relationship that India and Myanmar share, and the kind of challenges that it has, and what should India do in future to address these questions. Now, when we look at the factors, the first factor, the most important factor that kind of control or has a very important role to play in the whole equation is China. Now, you would see that, or rather, we would see that China has an easy access. If China is able to increase its power in Myanmar, which it has been doing so, if we look at the level of investment, the kind of organization, the kind of friendships or the relationships, the bilateral and multilateral relationships it is going or entering into, and the kind of investments it's making, and the economic investments, economic partnerships it is making. So, definitely, China is playing a major role, and it has a need to play a major role because if it is able to control Myanmar, it will be able to go closer to the region that it wants to control, that is the maritime region or the maritime routes, as well as the Bay of Bengal and the Indian Ocean. So here again, it's a question of India's kind of security, national security, and national interest, in the sense that it is also the region in the Bay of Bengal where you find that the Andaman and Nicobar Islands are situated. And India definitely, if it loses power here, then India's position will be gradually very, very weak. So this is one issue. Secondly, the other thing that we have seen is that China is gradually trying to make its presence felt, because it has a, that is one of the policies that we talk of, that encirclement. And this encircling that India is feeling, that China is gradually trying to encircle India by making its presence in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in Sri Lanka, and then in Bangladesh, it has already kind of made its presence felt, and also in Myanmar through various kind of investment projects, infrastructure projects, that becomes very, very problematic for India. Now, what India did was strategically also it is very, very problematic, because then India will, because India is connected to the northeast through only a small 22 kilometers region that is called the Chicken Neck or the Siliguri corridor. And if that is out or that is taken away, then or that is broken, then that link between India and the rest of India and Northeast India will be broken. So that becomes very, very important. So the second thing that is important in this whole equation again is the question of Northeast, as I was talking about. Now, Northeast is very rich resource wise, and as also it is a part of India. And if you look at the Act East policy and the various investments that India is making towards connectivity and entering on for trade partnerships, economic partnerships to East Asia and Southeast Asia. So this region becomes very, very essential, and Myanmar, of course, becomes absolutely important for India. So India has been looking into developing friendship. There was a friendship road that was built, India-Myanmar Friendship Road. Then it has also developed or is trying to develop the other transit facilities, so that the economic partnership that India has with Myanmar is better, and also the problems that it is Myanmar becomes a friend of India, and so the problems that might crop up in Northeast India can be managed well. So this is the second, and that is also one of the reasons that you would see that India is has gone ahead and developed the Sitwe port, which is in the eastern parts of India, and that it has kind of tried to support Myanmar. Although you would or we would also see that Myanmar's leadership is India does not really actually address, or rather India is not very keen to, uh, because its commitments of to democracy, that is also becomes questionable, but still we would see that India is engaging in it. But then China is way ahead, because it is of course very very rich, it has a lot of money, it is able to set up a lot of infrastructural projects as well as roads, and the way it has been doing so in case of Southeast Asia also, where it has developed, invested a lot of in many other the smaller nations like Philippines, Thailand, and other countries, Laos and Cambodia. Now what China is trying to do is that in Myanmar, it is trying to set up a huge offshore economic zone for the exploitation of natural resources. And Myanmar is very rich in natural resources, and that it is expected to set up around 30,000 square mile, huge kind of an offshore economic zone, so that it is able to exploit those natural resources and take it to China for the manufacture of various things. Now, that would actually be a threat to India's maritime interest and also the economic interest. So, what we have seen is since 2014, in fact, we have been observing a shift in India's policy, especially with regards to military cooperation. India has been, we have seen in the earlier period that their military heads, they have gone, they have visited Myanmar, and there has been a lot of military cooperation in the sense of training, setting up training institutes, supporting them with military equipments, as well as giving them a lot of support in terms of training them and kind of supporting them, and also logistically, and also providing them with a lot of intelligence inputs. Now, when we look at the bilateral trade, we have seen that there has been a kind of a rise in 2024-25. The data shows that it is 2.1 billion US dollars that we are seeing, and Indian exports are less as compared to the imports from Myanmar. Now, India imports a lot of pulses, food staples, whereas India has been able to capture 60% of the medicine market in Myanmar. Now, it is not that it does not have other players, but India has been able to do it because Indian medicines are supposed to be very cheap and good quality, and so Myanmar has been importing a lot of Indian medicines. So what we have seen is trading has increased, economic relations has increased, and India right now is the fourth largest partner of Myanmar with regard to these statistics. Now, with regard to investments, we find that Myanmar is a very good place for Indian investments, and India is ranking as the 11th largest investor in Myanmar. Of course, China is leading, but India is also not far behind. And when we look at the investments, we find that with regard to US where investments in Myanmar, it is around 782.821 million US dollars. That is the latest data, that is 31st March 2025. So this shows that India has been a very, very important partner with regard to investment. And so on 25th January 2024, a trade settlement mechanism was operationalized, by as a result of which this was the rupee kyat trade settlement mechanism, as a result of which India could trade in rupee. Now this is just the economic part that we are seeing. Now the other aspect that India has entered is like supporting the carrying out humanitarian work when there are disasters. So we have seen that there has been a lot of disasters due to climate change. We have been seeing a lot of disasters are happening, and Bay of Bengal is very prone to cyclones, as we could see from the data. So, this region has been experiencing a lot of cyclones, and India has come up as a big supporter and a big partner in terms of providing disaster relief to the people of Myanmar. So, there are a lot of, even in um, uh, since 2017, we have been seeing that there are a lot of uh, efforts have been made by India in providing support. In fact, in the recent earthquake, Operation Brahma was there. Like in 2025, the Operation Brahma was launched. Last year, it was Operation Sadbhav. So what we are seeing that India has been very, very supportive in terms of supporting Myanmar in terms of providing disaster relief. And the second thing that India has been instrumental or very, very active is providing support in terms of investing in setting up of schools in the Rakhine state and developing the Rakhine state so that this region becomes developed. And this is a part of also managing the Rohingya issue, that people would not leave these lands, and rather they would stay back, and Myanmar also is able to develop this region. Now, this is a very big humanitarian work that India has engaged into, and it shows the humanitarian face of India. Now, apart from that, we are also seeing a cultural ties, a lot of cultural ties in terms of soft power that is being used. Now, soft power has been one of the major instruments that has been used both by China and India, and we would see that India has been extremely since India also has a lot of pilgrimage sites, Buddhist pilgrimage sites, and Buddhism is a major, that is the major language, major religion, sorry, major religion of the Myanmaris, and that is the religion followed by the Mamar community. So because of that, we would see that India has thought of, or rather, the Indian government has started the project of developing a Buddhist pilgrimage center. It's a kind of a triangular thing where it is Vadanagar, where you would see that there are a lot of mounds that have been excavated. So the pilgrimage sites are to be connected, and that is one of the major projects that India has taken up, and also to strengthen the cultural ties that India has had with Myanmar in the earlier when it was called Burma. Now, apart from that, India is also banking on the diaspora, which is a big diaspora. It is around 2% of the total population, ranging from 1.5 million to 2.5 million, and they are very, very one of the most important communities which are supporting, which are kind of playing a major role in the development of Myanmar. And we would see that this diaspora community is also that is being used or is being utilized to uh, play a major role in strengthening the cultural ties. And in fact, we have seen recently there were two, three events. One is that events were organized with relation to this Ramayana. There were some Dasera festival. Apart from that, they are trying to bring up the old ties in terms of support. And in the recent earthquake, when the many of the sites, the Ananda temple was destroyed and many of the pagodas were destroyed, those were to be those were rebuilt by India, and they were India assisted in uh, uh, renovating them and repairing them. So that was a big this is one of the major areas where India has been working to develop or reach to the people. That is a domain of foreign policy, that where you are reaching to the people, people to people connects. So it's not just government to government connects, but people to people connect is also being carried out. And also looking at the fact that if you look at Northeast India and the ethnic communities, there is a lot of similarity between the communities which are there in Myanmar and the ones who are here in India. And it's not just ethnic similarities but also cultural similarities, and this is a kind of we could say that this is one of the main aspect that can be leveraged by India, and India is trying to do so. So what we have seen is that apart from this development, India is also trying to look into the various organizations, especially ASEAN and BIMSTEC, not just act as part of its actist policy, so that it can carry out dialogues, and it also can carry out a lot of other kind of activities, so that it is becomes a partner in development with Myanmar. Now, even if you look at the Sagar vision, so India has actually developed the Sidway port to counter the Chinese um, fronted Kokpyu port, and it was, you would see that India has been again and again, India has been trying to look into it. Is India is not just increasing its power in the region, in the Bay of Bengal region, but it is also trying to counter the Chinese presence, and the kind which China has always been doing so through money, through investment, and making its presence felt in terms of supporting various smaller nations in the region. So what we find that India, with regard to India, economically, the exports have increased to a great extent, which is a good thing. And India is also developing its religious tourism, and it is also becoming a member of these various multilateral organizations, and has been instrumental in developing a presence in, or these organizations has helped India to make its presence and also emerge as one of the major voices in the region. Now the question is that how do we balance? Now the question of balance comes here mainly because of the reason that one is India has to think about its strategic interest and the economic interest when it is dealing with Myanmar. But at the same time, it also has to keep in mind that the question of democratic values. Now, how does India balance this? Now, India has been, of late, we would see that the India has shifted from its earlier policies of one is that instead of this non-alignment, it has gone for multi-alignment policies. And secondly, India has remained, or rather kept a distance in terms of not commenting or not emerging or not interfering in others internal affairs, in a sense that very often it is being questioned that India, this way India is not raising any question, India is not commenting on the international issues, but India has tried to maintain its autonomy and not go into those kind of issues which does not concern it. So that is how India is managing, although there are questions that what would happen, like say for example when we are looking at the tariffs and India's during the attack, that is post operation Sindhu, these questions have being raised that will India have friends later on. Now these questions remain, but at the same time India has been very very strategic enough not to interfere, not to talk about what is happening inside the country. Rather, just keep in mind that it has to talk about its own strategic interests, basically securing Northeast Asia, Northeast India. Number two, talking about says, economic partnerships, and also balancing the whole discussion about this Rohingya, the second most important issue right now, which is present, that is the question of Rohingya refugees. So this is a very very delicate issue that is there, because India cannot actually push them out, but at the same time, India is not able to say anything. And presently, these people are being pushed inside, and they have entered as refugees, and India does not have the resources because already it has a huge population. The question of resource competition always is there. Secondly, when we look at the trade relations, India is definitely very weak in terms of trade relations when we look at China. China is very, very powerful, has a very powerful presence, and India's withdrawal from RCEP is another blow to her presence, and is not being able to increase her power there, or not able to counter the Chinese presence. The third issue, of course, is the internal security issue that needs to be kept in mind, because it is many of these insurgents who are operating in northeast India. They were camping in Myanmar, and China was providing them with weapons, where there were a lot of information available from the intelligence, as well as a lot of evidence was also collected. So in under that condition, what happens is that how does India, or how can India ensure that these elements are neutralized, they are put under control, and Myanmar plays a friendly country to India, so that India's interests in Northeast India is protected, India's strategic interests are protected, and India's Northeast, the development that is taking place in Northeast can carry on without any trouble or without any issues. Now, the other issue that India is frequently, and that is something that even Myanmar has a problem, and that is a free movement border, that the border region has a free movement, because of which this region is also not so policed well. And of course, because the reason is that people to people connect, that is there, ethnic and cultural similarity is also one of the reasons, but this also has created problem for both the countries in terms of smuggling and trafficking in weapons, in drugs. So this region has created a major, or is rather a major problem for both the countries. And how does both, or how do they deal with it? That is something, or how India takes this up and tries to support the government in Myanmar in countering these issues, or countering these problems. That is also something, and also supporting us in the sense that if drugs come inside that, or weapons come inside the northeast region through these borders, then India is going to be worst affected, because terrorism is these insurgents or the terrorists would become very very active, and development would get stalled. The kind of development that we are seeing now, that would get stalled. So this is also a major problem that India is trying to look into, especially after the coup that we saw, or after the kind of fall of the democratically elected government in Bangladesh. That has become all the more very very important for India. Another issue that is India needs to look into is the question of trust deficit that India unfortunately has had to encounter because of the delay in the project implementation, the implementation of the various projects that India had promised to do with Myanmar. Those got delayed, and as a result of which, there is a question of trust, like whether India is serious with it, or it's just promise, 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 and nothing more. So this is another question that has been in the minds of the scholars and analysts, that how do we deal with this trust deficit. So this, keeping this in mind, and also countering that we cannot do much, in the sense that China is of course very powerful, it has a lot of money, it is one of the richest, and it has a lot of, if you look at the economy, Chinese economy is very very powerful. And in this context, definitely they will be able to invest a lot, and moreover it has also brought inside Myanmar within that BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, which India again did not be a part of it. Now, when we are looking at that, Myanmar has been an integral part of whatever Chinese design is there, or their maps are there with regard to the kind of future development, or the future kind of actions that they would be doing. India also cannot actually leave Myanmar, because Myanmar is very important for India, because it is the gateway to Southeast Asia and East Asia. Now, keeping that in mind, uh, the other question that becomes very, very relevant for India is her own internal security, which is again dependent on Myanmar, especially in the northeastern region. So, what is important is for India right now, it is important that Myanmar becomes stable. It is important that it is stable, and it is there is no civil disorder, and it is in a very strong position, that there is law and order, and there is no such conflict which might create disturbances. Because when there will be a disturbance inside Myanmar, India will definitely become affected, because Myanmar is her neighbor. Now, apart from this geopolitical importance, just not just because of India's neighborhood first, or the Actist policy initiatives, the question of national security has been one of the major questions that India has been dealing with, and as we were discussing. And when we look at the way China is gradually entering the region, when just earlier we would see its imprint in Southeast Asian countries, and how Southeast Asia was balancing, the nations were balancing India and Chinese presence in the region, and they were taking the support, but at the same time, they were kind of maintaining a distance, and they were looking at China and India with a lot of suspicion, but at the same time, they were taking the help. But China is gradually entering the region with its vision very clear that it wants a control of this region, that it is the Bay of Bengal region and the Indian Ocean region. And for that, it needs to Myanmar is one such country which will give, or which is in a position, or rather, it would help. And one of the argument that is also one of the argument that is raised now, or that's being discussed, is the position of Rakhine State, that probably US also wants to control this region, and definitely US wants to, because US doesn't want its hegemony to end. So it is trying to play politics inside Rakhine State and trying to break out, or bring or create some kind of disturbance in the Rakhine region, so that this becomes a smaller country, a different country, a separate country, separate from Myanmar, where US would be able to control, because that would not have that kind of command, or does not have that kind of we would say that power to assert as an independent nation. So it needs to be supported, and US would provide that support. And in fact, after the Bangladesh, the end of the Hasina regime, what we saw was the presence of US inside Bangladesh, and the new government was uh, more than welcoming US to come and help them in developing the ports. And that was not a very good sign for India, and also definitely not a good sign for China. China was also observing it. So these equations, the changing equations, and also the kind of things that we see in Nepal. And when we look at Nepal, the China has been taking away villages in Nepal, and the earlier regime, Oli regime, was not speaking about anything. Similarly, in Bhutan, you would see that satellite maps show that China has been instrumental in taking up regions. They have taken away certain regions, and they have established villages, or kind of townships. Now that is dangerous for India, because India is now in a very difficult position, that China is very near to her, and even there were two nations, friendly nations, that is Bangladesh and Myanmar. Now Bangladesh is kind of not very happy, or rather, it is not in a very good position. So India right now needs to. It is very very important for her to keep Myanmar as a friend, and do that extra bit, so that in Myanmar remains and does not become a satellite country for China, because that is what we should be very careful about, that it should not become a satellite state for China, because the moment it becomes a satellite state for China, our internal security will be destroyed, or rather that will be challenged, and especially Northeast India, and also the regional affairs would become would be like nothing but China, the puppets in the hands of China, because then India would be pressurized to do whatever China or Beijing would want, the way it would want the regional affairs to be run. So India would also lose its own voice. So that is also going to disturb the regional balance. So keeping that in mind, Myanmar stands out as very important player for India, not just for its own, that Myanmar, for the economic interests and other interests, but also for strategic reason, and also to ensure that India's voice remains in the region, in the regional affairs, and it is not just always it doesn't just become a part of a, it's under, always under pressure, because already we have seen that after Operation Sindoor, we have seen that there is presence of US is entering there, and we are seeing a different kind of an axis. Although India is trying, Russia, China, India axis, they are thinking of developing that kind of an axis. But then in international relations, nobody is a permanent friend, and nobody is a permanent foe either. Now, since China has a longer interest and a design to control the region, the Bay of Bengal and the Indian Ocean region. So we need to be a little careful. Now, when we look at it, so Myanmar is not just important for India, but it is also important for China, Chinese strategic interests. So that makes it all the more important for India to kind of look at Myanmar and consider Myanmar to be a very, very important strategic player, and to observe and do all the things that it can do, not just from government to government, but from business house, or chamber of commerce, Indian chamber of commerce to Myanmar chamber of commerce, or the business houses, they should get linked, the trading interest should get linked, the people to people connect should be developed through cultural ties and soft power. So that is what India should do. India should also be very careful when it's dealing with the Rohingya crisis, because India has an issue of Bangladesh, because if it, say for example, India tries to push back the Rohingyas, then where? Then Bangladesh would be against it. Then there would be a lot of domestic issues as well. So India has to be very careful, and also the international regimes, they would raise the question of support to the refugees. So where do you, because these are people who have suddenly become stateless. So how can India do it? So one of the things that India is doing is right, that is investing in the region in Rakhine state, so that the schools are built and there is some kind of development, so that the people go back to that place, and there is some amount of employment, livelihood is there, there is security, and also India can talk to Myanmar regarding that. But right now India has to be very careful in whether it's making any statement or anything. So we see that India has remained very, very quiet, although at times the court was saying that, well, India is not a dharmshala, so everybody can come and stay here. But then there is also kind of, we are considering what is to be done. So it's a very, very problematic point, rather, how India deals with it. Apart from that, India needs to increase the cooperation in terms of security and border management, because if we do not manage our borders, then it would not be possible for us to ensure that the development that we are having in Northeast India, it can be carried out, because there would be questions, or there would be a lot of movements which will not be very helpful to India. And also, keeping in mind that Myanmar is one of the most important partners when we are looking at the actist uh, policy. So, this actist policy of India can only become successful if we are considering Myanmar and protecting Myanmar and managing the borders well. So, if we manage the borders well and there is no conflict in the borders, then we would be in a better position, because then what happens is, there very often we have seen that in the recently Manipur clashes, there were a lot of reports coming up that many of these insurgents were running up or going into Myanmar, or there were certain elements inside Myanmar which were creating these conflicts. So these things need to be, that is what is important, is this kind of information, or this misinformation, or creating of information that might disturb the relations between the two nations, need to be taken up, because perception is very important. So how the Myanmarese government perceives or looks at India, India needs to work on it as well, so that India's perception to the Myanmaris is not that India is not a good friend, rather a very dependable friend. That is important for the Indian government to look into. So it needs to work on generating a good perception, that how the other country looks at, how the media of that country looks at India, how the people of that country look at India. So that is a point where India has to work on a lot, and also overcome the trust deficit that India has developed, or rather, unfortunately, it has developed, that India is not trustworthy. India talks a lot, but it doesn't do much. So those things, or rather, this needs to be also looked at in a very serious manner, in the sense that India has to work on it. And also, when we are looking at the kind of ethnic conflicts that Myanmar has, because this has again come up in a big way. On 18th August in Myanmar, the junta, they declared that they are going to hold elections from December 28th of 20 this year. Now that brought in a lot of issues, because the question of many of these ethnic communities who were till now, they were not talking much, now they have raised that they are going to boycott this election because it is nothing but a trap. According to many, this is nothing but a trap, because the junta leadership would not definitely want to have a democratically elected government which would work on its own and would not listen to it. So it is just to show the rest of the world that we are democratic, we believe in democracy, that they are promising to have elections and declaring the date. So basically this the general mean is not very serious about it. It is just to show off that we are doing so. And so the state administrative council, along with the military junta, whatever they are saying, it is not to be trusted, they are not to be trusted. So it is a kind of a trap, as has been pointed out, and it's not going to be a transition. Now India has not given a statement to it, rather India is keeping her fingers crossed. Like India is believing that it is important that we keep in mind our strategic interest, and these interests are really really very important for us. And the situation is also very delicate, and India cannot make a statement and destroy the peace that it has developed between in itself and Myanmar. And we have seen that during the whole period India has not spoken, rather we have seen that India has gone ahead when it came to support disaster relief. India went ahead and did it. Secondly, India is trying to go for a very positive engagement with Myanmar in the terms of development, in terms of supporting it in the humanitarian work. So that way, India has, of course, India has her own strategic interest, but what the face that India is showing is the humanitarian, the humane face, which is probably going to make a good cut in terms of perception, developing a good perception about India in the region, in the not just in the rest of the world, but also within Myanmar itself. That is how the Myanmarese people look at India, and that becomes very very important when you look at the look at how India would conduct herself in future, because trade, economy, strategic issues, border issues, these remain. But what is important is that how people look at, and how India is able to use this very important factor as a very very strong factor in the future relationship between India and Myanmar. So that's it from me. So if you have any questions, you can raise it.
Thank you, Dr. Ranjita,
Thank you,
for
sir.
coverage of multifarious issues concerning India and Myanmar. And now I would open the house for a question answer session. Now I will ask the students to please go ahead with your question. First, introduce yourself, then put your question in a simple and clear manner. Come on, be quick.
Good evening, ma'am. My name is Preet. Good evening, sir. I wanted to ask you that how does
Who
the state
introduce
politics?
yourself?
Yes, ma'am. My name is Preet. I'm currently pursuing my master's in political science from University of Delhi. I had a question regarding how does the state politics of Myanmar, how does the state politics of Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Manipur, and Mizoram, since they are the border states of Myanmar, influence India-Myanmar relations?
Definitely so. If you look at, that's why I picked up Manipur, because you would see like Arunachal Pradesh, for example, if I look at it, then Arunachal Pradesh has a lot of more than 100 tribals, and right now they have an issue with it, that is the people, the Chakmas and the Hajongs who have come inside, and that is one of the issues. But definitely, what is important is when you look at the internal. That is why I was talking about the border management. it is not just the insurgents but also the question of drugs. If you look at Northeast, it these one of the arguments that has been, and there are a lot of papers on it, that the reason India was not happy with the junta was that they were into drug trafficking and weapons trafficking, and they were just like carriers. And the Northeast was always very, very restless because of this, because they would get these, and many of the youth, the youths in Northeast, they were being destroyed there. They were becoming drug addicts, and in fact drug is a major issue in Arunachal Pradesh, and this is also one of the reasons that they are not very happy with it. So definitely the state politics, if you look at Nagaland again, it is still not in a position, although we have a government. But then when you look at the position of the NSCIN, so this is also one of the major, what you would say, factors when we look at the politics of Northeast India. And that is why it is important that when I talked about this people to people connect, I also meant that it is not the mainland, it is Northeast which is very connected to Myanmar. So this kind of connects need to be, it is not through just using soft power or cultural diplomacy, but it is also through how people look at it, both sides, and what is their argument. And that is one of the reasons that the border, if you go to Meghalaya for example, or you go to these regions, there are a lot of places where you would see that there is still a lot of you would say familial relationship between the people. Those people are not divided, people don't understand borders, these are all political borders. So there are a lot of connects, and there is, and whenever the government tries to ensure very strict management of the border, people don't like it. Now, this needs to be, when we are talking about, mostly what we do is we tend to look at from the upper level, that is, we talk of government to government discussions or business discussions. But it is important that we also look into the people to people connect, and how perceptions are created, how people look at it, how people, it there needs to be a discussion also, say, that how the people in the bordering regions in India, they look at the Myanmaris, what is their desire, what kind of things that they would want, and what are the problems that they feel that exist and that needs to be tackled. So that needs to also reach the government both sides, so that we are the relationship becomes a very stable relationship. Because when you don't bring people inside the picture, then what happens is it's just a very superficial relationship that happens. And that's the point that I was trying to make, that it is important that, say, when I since I come from a region which is I just mentioned in my lecture also, Siliguri corridor, we have this issue that when we are talking about China, okay, there is a threat of China. Then we are talking about when there was this Operation Sindoor going on, Bangladesh was there, and it anytime anything could happen to this region. And so but we were not in the picture, we didn't know what is happening. So suddenly we had to be we were told that this is happening, we would only see that there was a lot of activity. Now this is important that the governments also consider the state politics, the micro politics, as well as what people think in their discussion. So that is presently, you would see that not much is done, only in seminars or here and there you would see a few papers, few research, but not in a bigger way. But what I would tell you is that this micro level work is still a lot to be done. And it was a good question.
Thank
Next
you, ma'am.
question. Next question. Come on. Next question. If you have any, because Dr. Ranjita is already very exhaustively, uh, explained everything in detail. Come on, be quick. Any other question? Dr. Ranjita, I have few quick queries on the
Yes, sir.
topic, and
Yes.
I receive, suggestions, questions on email also. Uh, to me, I think there are two factors so far India-Myanmar relations. One is the political instability in Myanmar, lack of democracy. This hinders,
Yes.
smooth relations between India and Myanmar. Second is the impact of China on India-Myanmar relations. So far as the
True.
democracy is concerned, it is for the people of that country to decide. We cannot interfere or we cannot influence that. But so far as the impact of China is concerned, I am reminded of a statement by former Indian ambassador to Myanmar. He was there in '93. He was, before retirement, he was the Ambassador Preet Malik. I had an opportunity to interview him long back and recently on Operation Sindoor. At 90, he is so full of energy. Oh no, and he thinks very loudly about the issues facing Indian foreign policy. I am really surprised. He said that when I joined in Myanmar as ambassador, for 1 month I could not submit my letter of appointment, that is credentials letter. And every time I ask them that when the ceremony is to take place, unless that is done, ambassador cannot function officially. But there were, many excuses and so many things. Then he said, I wrote to the government of India, please do something. I am just sitting idle here in Myanmar doing nothing as India's ambassador. P.V. Narasimha Rao was the prime minister at that time. And New Delhi advised him, please go slow, remain silent, let things go on like this. Then he met one other ambassador from foreign country. He was in Myanmar. He asked, what's the problem? I mean, they are not allowing me to submit my letter of credential. I cannot work officially as a ambassador of India. That ambassador from Southeast Asian country, I would not name him. He said, my dear friend, the Chinese ambassador to Myanmar is away. He is in Peking. Unless he returns to Myanmar, you will not be allowed to submit your letter of credentials as ambassador of India. So great was the
True.
influence, the impact of China that the Myanmar
Mm.
government could not get out of it. Even now, I think they have to think twice. The problem in Myanmar is they have to balance between India and China, and sometimes
That is
they falter, and that is very, I think harmful to them also. Their own economic interest also suffer and all that. But this is the real politics, and you have to bear with it. And you have to wait for the things to improve. So these two things, I think, they have a great impact on India. Unless we can work out. So far as China is concerned, China is out to, annoy us, harm us. I mean, whatever they can do to, belittle India in the eyes of the, regional countries and all that. But we have to work hard and get the trust back from Myanmar.
that is
So
why.
thank you very
Yes,
much,
sir.
Dr. Ranjita, for a very well covered, lecture on various aspects. You have given thought to many options that are available to India, and I hope the policymakers will take note of it. And so once again, I thank you for sparing time. I know it requires a lot of energy, a lot of time, and efforts to prepare for such a lecture. So thank you very much, and
Thank you so much.
we hope to continue to remain in touch. And with your permission, I would like to close this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, sir. Good.